You're lying in bed. The room is quiet. Your eyes are closed. Your thoughts are starting to blur into something looser, less structured. You're not awake anymore. Not quite asleep yet. You're somewhere in between. And then it happens. Your whole body jerks, suddenly and violently, like you've just missed a step on a staircase that wasn't there. Your eyes snap open. Your heart is pounding a little. And for a second, you have no idea what just happened. If this has happened to you, you're not broken. You're not having some kind of medical event, and you're definitely not alone. This is one of the most common, most universal experiences the human body produces, and almost nobody talks about it, because it's over in less than a second, and most people just shrug it off and go back to sleep. But it has a name. It has a handful of competing scientific explanations, and once you understand what's actually going on, it's honestly one of the stranger little quirks of being a human body. It's called a hypnic jerk, sometimes also called a sleep start, or a hypnagogic jerk. And depending on which research you look at, somewhere between 50% and 70% of people experience them at some point in their lives. Some people get them constantly, almost every night. Some people barely ever notice one. But the mechanism behind them appears to be the same for everyone. And it all comes down to a strange little miscommunication that happens as your brain shuts down for the night. Here's what's actually going on inside you in the moments before a hypnic jerk happens. As you fall asleep, your body doesn't just flip a switch from on to off. It goes through a gradual transition. Your breathing slows down, your heart rate drops, your core body temperature dips slightly. And critically, your muscles begin to relax in a process called muscle atonia. Your nervous system essentially turns down the volume on the signals keeping your muscles tense and ready for action. Normally, this is a smooth, quiet process. You don't notice it happening because your brain handles the transition in the background while the part of you that's you is already drifting off. But sometimes that transition isn't smooth. Sometimes, as your muscles relax, your brain catches that sudden drop in tension and muscle activity, and for a split second, it misreads it. Here's the theory that most sleep researchers find compelling. Deep in your brain, there's a part of your nervous system responsible for monitoring your balance and your sense of where your body is in space, your proprioception, essentially your internal map of your own limbs and posture. As your muscles go slack heading into sleep, this monitoring system picks up that sudden loss of tension. And because losing muscle tone that fast is exactly what happens when your body is actually falling, your brain briefly interprets it that way. It thinks you're falling. And so it does what any reasonable threat detection system would do. It fires off an emergency signal to your muscles, trying to get you to catch yourself before you hit the ground. Except there's no ground to hit, because you're lying safely in bed. The signal still fires anyway. Your body jolts, your eyes pop open, and a half-second later, your brain realizes there was never any danger, and you settle back down, often without even fully waking up. It's essentially a false alarm, a reflex built for catching yourself from an actual fall, misfiring at exactly the wrong, or maybe exactly the right, moment. Now, that explains the mechanism, the how, but there's a more interesting question underneath it, which is, why does this mechanism exist in the first place? And this is where things get a little speculative, because nobody can run a controlled experiment on millions of years of evolution. But there is a theory that a lot of researchers find genuinely compelling, and it has to do with where our distant ancestors used to sleep. Many primates, including some of our evolutionary ancestors, slept in trees. And if you're sleeping in a tree, a sudden loss of muscle tone is actually a legitimately dangerous situation. It could mean you're about to fall out of the tree and seriously hurt yourself. Under that theory, the hypnic jerk reflex may be an ancient survival mechanism, a holdover from millions of years of needing a fast, automatic response to the sensation of falling while half asleep in a precarious spot. Our environment changed. We moved into beds, onto solid ground, into houses. But the reflex itself never got the memo. It's still running the same emergency protocol, just in a context where it no longer makes any sense. It's a neat theory, and it's intuitive, but it's worth saying clearly that it's not proven. It's a hypothesis that fits the evidence reasonably well, not an established fact. Some researchers push back on it and argue the explanation might be simpler than an inherited survival instinct, that it could just be a kind of neural noise, a normal byproduct of a complicated nervous system going through a chaotic transition between two very different states of consciousness. Falling asleep is, in a sense, one brain state shutting down while another one boots up, and during that handoff, a little bit of crossed wiring or asynchronous firing between different brain regions might be enough to trigger a jerk on its own. No evolutionary backstory required. What we do know with a lot more confidence is what makes hypnic jerks more likely to happen on any given night. And this is genuinely useful information, because a few of these factors are things you have some control over. Caffeine is one of the biggest. Caffeine, especially later in the day, keeps your nervous system more activated even as you're trying to wind down. And that mismatch between a stimulated nervous system and trying to fall asleep appears to make hypnic jerks more frequent. Stress and anxiety are another major factor. When your mind is racing, your brain is, in a sense, on higher alert, even as your body tries to relax, and that heightened vigilance seems to make the falling misinterpretation more likely to trigger. Sleep deprivation matters too. If you're chronically exhausted, your transition into sleep tends to be faster and less smooth, which seems to increase the odds of a jerky, abrupt handoff rather than a gentle one. And intense exercise, particularly later in the evening, has also been linked to more frequent hypnic jerks, likely because your nervous system is still partly activated from the physical exertion when you try to wind down. None of these factors guarantee you'll get a hypnic jerk, and plenty of people get them on perfectly calm, well-rested, caffeine-free nights too. But if you notice you're getting them constantly, those 4 areas, caffeine, stress, sleep deprivation, and late exercise, are the most evidence-backed places to look first. It's also worth knowing that hypnic jerks sit in a whole family of strange little phenomena that can happen during the transition into sleep, a state researchers call the hypnagogic state. Some people experience brief, vivid flashes of imagery right as they're drifting off. Faces, shapes, scenes that aren't quite dreams but aren't quite waking thoughts either. Some people experience a sudden, brief sensation of falling with no physical jerk attached to it at all, just the feeling. And in rarer cases, people experience things like a sudden loud bang or explosion sound that isn't real, a phenomenon with the genuinely dramatic name exploding head syndrome, which sounds alarming but is generally considered harmless. The hypnic jerk is really just one member of a broader category of glitches that can occur as your brain switches modes, and most of them, including the jerk itself, are considered a completely normal part of how human sleep works. So, should you ever actually be worried about them? For the overwhelming majority of people, no. An occasional hypnic jerk, even a fairly dramatic one that wakes you up and gets your heart racing for a second, is considered a normal variation of human sleep, not a symptom of anything wrong. It's not a seizure, it's not a sign of a neurological disorder, and it's not dangerous to your heart or your brain. The main situation where it's worth bringing up with a doctor is if the jerks are happening so frequently, night after night, that they're meaningfully disrupting your ability to fall asleep or stay asleep. If you're lying awake dreading the next one, or you're chronically sleep-deprived because you can't get past that transition point without being jolted back awake. In those cases, it's less about the hypnic jerk itself being dangerous and more about chronic sleep disruption being worth addressing. whatever the underlying cause turns out to be. For everyone else, the advice is refreshingly simple. If you want to reduce how often they happen, the same habits that improve sleep quality in general tend to help here too. Cutting back on caffeine in the afternoon and evening, having some kind of wind-down routine before bed instead of going straight from a stimulating activity into trying to sleep, keeping a fairly consistent sleep schedule, and managing stress levels where you can. None of that will guarantee you never experience one again, because they seem to happen to nearly everyone at least occasionally. But it can meaningfully reduce how often you get jolted awake right at the edge of sleep. So the next time it happens, the next time you're drifting off and your body suddenly jerks like you've missed a step that was never there, you'll know exactly what's going on. Somewhere deep in your nervous system, an ancient, slightly overzealous alarm system briefly mistook the normal process of falling asleep for the much older, much more dangerous process of actually falling. It got the timing wrong by about 100,000 years, but it meant well.